convey that who doesn't like to travel? Traveling is one of those things that every human being somehow has fantasized in their lives, has dream about going to places that are unknown. And I think like there's so much to say about traveling. So today we will be having a conversation about traveling as a huge privilege. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that word. Privilege is like a tinted word, but I believe like in order for us to grasp all the responsibilities and the beautiful things that we have in life, we need to grasp the concept of privilege. So today we have an amazing, very knowledgeable person who will be helping today and having a small conversation because there's so much to talk about this topic. But I'm very thankful that they are able to join us today. So I hope Bani can join us momentarily. Oh, and I don't know, I don't see anybody yet, but I hope.
Hey.
Oh, hey, hey, are you able to hear me well?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Thank you so much for joining today. I was telling everyone that we were trying to have this conversation last week, but things happened, and I hope things are a little bit better today. I don't know, how is your kitty?
She's still sick, so yeah, it's ongoing.
Okay. It is a chronic disease, no?
Yeah, and then she got an infection, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was telling everyone that these things happen. That's very common, like, and I think, it's so good to honor these things in our lives. We see so much superficiality in the internet these days that we don't realize that a lot of us have real lives and real things, real issues, especially when we're trying to convey things in the internet. So I wanted to be thankful for your presence today. And I was telling everyone that I'm so glad that you are able to join us because you're a professional in this field. And there's so many things to talk about traveling as a huge privilege as it is.
Hmm.
So I would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone today.
Yeah, my name is Bunny Amor. I use they, them pronouns. AJHO if you speak Spanish. I'm here, Matinacock Land, Canarsie Land, and Muncie Lenape Land in Queens, NYC. And yeah, I have dark, short hair. I'm light skinned, person of color, and I have my white headphones. There's a lot happening in my background. I have like a blue wall with a fake fireplace mantle and this very colorful, like tropical wallpaper on my other wall. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you
And
so
like
much.
what I do and stuff. I'm a writer. I write a lot about race, power, and travel, and all of the things that it encompasses, and all the ways that it is used. And yeah, I also write about gender, food, you know, climate, and the environment. All of that has to do with travel. All of that encompasses just everything. Migration and power is just the place that everything comes together. But yeah, can you hear my notifications?
I mean, not your notifications, but I am hearing you.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yes. So I like to introduce myself for the people that are gonna be watching these in the future. My name is Joanna. I'm the sole person behind mamatortuga.org. It's a bilingual website in which we do support and do activism for families in two languages, in English and Spanish. And we tackle many issues, but I'm also a folk herbalist, so I do a lot of things with the earth. But one of the things that I wanted to support and I wanted to say is like I'm an immigrant, And I think there are a lot of things that are missing in a lot of narratives when people talk about traveling and tourism. And that's one of the reasons why I named the title of this conversation, traveling as a huge privilege, because I think tourism by itself is such a huge industry around the world, and it's overwhelmingly, what can I say, very pale as an industry. And of course, we're seeing a lot of breakthrough, but what worries me, I have to say, is like there's so much disregard for many others in this field. And I think that it's very important to highlight who is able to travel around the world, because I think the first part that I would like to clarify in this live is like who has access to traveling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always make a difference between travel and tourism. And not that, I'm a traveler, not a tourist. I think that's bullshit. But in that everyone, I mean, immigrants travel the most, migrants travel the most. Everyone is traveling all over the place, whether your people were stolen and trafficked and displaced or forced out through different kinds of, forms of domination and oppression and geopolitics. So I think we have to be specific when talking about travel for leisure. So, of course, crossing any border, I mean, requires papers, and that's one thing. But in general, and obviously you can cross borders without papers, and that's another thing. But oftentimes after that, you cannot leave. So besides that, yeah, I would say travel is not inherently a privilege, but I would say leisure tourism definitely is. And like I said, when it comes to borders, I mean, some of us just have passports that are much more powerful. If you have if you're just from a certain place, you're going to have to go through all these visas. Your scope of where you can travel is so much more limited. So we already know that. And then there's the economics of it. Even if you are from like the US, for example, how many people here can go somewhere else? And the other thing I want to challenge is traveling as going abroad. I don't know, like, I don't know why that dominates these conversations. You can travel locally. That is very much a thing. It's called heritage tourism or local tourism, go to another state. I mean, Turtle Island is very big. So, I mean, there's that also. Again, we're always traveling, as Faith, a daily mentor and a writer always says. Every time people of color leave their home, they travel. So this is happening in all these different ways already. But like travel, quote unquote, is just seen as going to another country and going to a resort. And that's very limited way of kind of talking about it. Because when we limit these conversations to those forms of tourism, we talk a lot about people in power and how they should do better rather than the industry and how we think about place and land and our relationships to land and people for everyone, no matter where you are, for everyone having these conversations. And it goes into ancestry as well. So, I mean, we're all the, products of travel, almost all of us, not a lot of Native folks who are still in the places where they are and trying to hold on to that. So people who are not able to travel for leisure tourism are often people who are holding on to stay in the place that they are still in and being displaced by long-term tourists or gentrifiers, as we call them. So, I mean, capitalism is always pushing us around, as is imperialism and capitalism.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry to intervene, but I like to put it in a more simpler terms because for a lot of me, at least from my audience, a lot of the people may not understand these terms. And I think, like bottom line, yes, like everyone may have, like the chance to travel, like Bani said, like to go places, to at least have, the opportunity to go to different spaces. But a lot of people may have different barriers to have access to travel it by itself. And I have to say, in one of my posts, I say like, yes, having the right passport really helps for you to plan or make any plans to travel. Usually the countries that are allowed to travel without any visa or application to go anywhere in the world are those countries that are mainly like known as colonialist countries for obvious reasons. No, like they will have access to these spaces, and people who are from the colonies, that is another that is another issue. Usually people that are not from those countries are heavily marked. I remember, I'm from Colombia, and I remember, like at one point the government had to change the color of the passport that used to be green, like my backdrop, because every time anyone in the airport will see a green passport, they immediately will think, oh, this is drug, like drug, they're bringing, trouble. And so it's just one of the examples of, like so many of the barriers that exist. But that's even with the people that have access to having a passport or even have the money to apply for a visa. I encounter many, and I will say the majority of the people in the world do not have access to neither have a passport, neither apply to a visa. So their force of, like traveling have to be pretty much, like adhere to local traveling. Usually it's also have to do with how safe it is for them to travel. Many people in many countries are not allowed to travel in their own home countries for security reasons. So, and also, let's, call it, many indigenous people are not allowed to travel freely in their own country because of racism or, barriers that have to do with their socioeconomic status inside their own countries. And it's I wanted to point it out because I think, like, borderline, we see so much, these accounts of traveling and tourism, and, like never takes in consideration the majority of people that want to go and traveling and actually have access to these spaces. But we have to see the other side of the whole issue, which we will be talking about today as well, which is who profits for having all these barriers for traveling for the majority of the world, and why is the system created that way?
I mean, colonization, that's it. There has to be writing down before actions can be taken. And a lot of these, as you call them, colonialist countries, but imperial nations that colonized others, the very few Western ones in the beginning, needed that narrative of entitlement, scientific racism, very exotified speculation about what was existing in the New World and all these places. It was all for capital, right? And of those Western countries, there was a very few. It's an upper class that was already, being able to do this. That were, botanists, explorers, herbalists, geographers, all these people who were traveling under the guise of natural history and knowledge collection for like hitching rides on these boats of, colonizers who were, there to steal people and move them around and take over places. Why? For trade routes. Traveling started with trade routes, whether they were, excuse me, trafficking in people or in place. And when you colonize a nation, all of that knowledge creation just is for trade. Just, what are the spices? What is growing here? What can be harvested here so we can trade to our other friendly allied nations? And thus you need local people to work that land. So they need to stay there. They can't leave, so they can always be a resource for capital. And the land, even though it's plundered and plundered and plundered, You know, there needs to be something there so that they can continue to trade with the rich. So,
And
uh,
also they need people that work in those spaces, like cheap labor, like people that, support their industries and whatever they're doing. Because let's face it, like, like in many of these spaces, the argument is that, oh, but, like these industries help the economies. But I mean, helps whom?
yeah, it doesn't. It's bullshit. I hate it's a very savory thing. And it's leftist people say this, or I wouldn't say leftist, but liberals, you know, those people. They say this often. It's for guilt reasons. I mean, of course, you know, some of these countries, their economies totally rely on tourism too much. And that's not a good thing. You going there and being a VIP in someone else's land, having, you know, going on your self-care vacation just means that some black woman is going to clean your clothes for you, you know, make your bed, serve you food. I mean, there's always someone else who's going to be in a service position. So again, that started with colonizing people and as well as trafficking in African people, so that you can have labor and exploit them, kill them, they'd be expendable just as the land is and everything that you can harvest off of it for that reason. So what I was saying was that it needs to be kept in the hands of the few, to enjoy whatever there is, because we always need that local service class to serve the tourists. If we don't decolonize travel culture, we don't have decolonization is what I mean. The movement toward decolonization, we need land returns. We need the land back so that the original stewards can take care of them. Black people and Afro-descendant people need reparations, and we need abolition of these systems that are keeping people in cages, and that includes borders. I mean, what I mean when I say decolonizing travel culture is we all should be able to have the autonomy and self-determination to move freely about the world without fear of violence, or that when we're gone, someone's going to take over the land and then you can't go back, or whatever the case may be. And that's just not the case. So that's
Well,
what,
and
go
that
ahead.
was you just summarized, pretty much like the whole background of what it is, the industry of traveling and tourism around the world. It has been like that for centuries. And the conversation right now is like, like we're trying to kind of like so many more people are having the means to travel and also access to, like getting to those places. And a lot of them are kind of like, well, but like we're trying to do our best. We're trying to help. We're trying and seriously, who doesn't like to travel? I started this IGLIVE, with that premise. Of course everybody loves traveling. Of course, that's something that like I believe, like in many ways, every human person would love to um, try to go to places that they have dream about, or they would love to go and meet the culture. And we had like kind of like put in our minds like, well, but we're doing our best, we're trying to do like the best that we can to help these people. But the reality is that we need to start listening to persons that really live in those spaces. And I think, bottom line, like the reason of having these conversations is like not like for me, it's like I don't have to, shame everybody at this moment, if you want to travel or no. I just want you to start thinking, like first that you have an amazing privilege if you have access to travel to those spaces, and second, you should be using that privilege in effective ways if you claim that you really love the people of those spaces, and those places. And for example, one of the posts that I did before this IGLIVE had to do with one part of the complaint on like tourism around the world at this moment is the destruction and the massive destruction of sacred spaces and natural spaces for the sake of tourism, And that is a huge issue, and it's not only on one part of the world. This is happening, like in this continent, in Africa, and in Asia. And people that are native for those areas are actually getting killed to oppose, to these developments or tourist industries. And that is in combination with the other exploitative industries that go hand in hand. Uh, that keeps happening, but if we are not conscious about like our role into those systems, how things are going to be able to ever change.
Yeah. To the first things that you were saying, what was I going to say? You said everyone wants to travel and the privilege. Well, you're helping people. Oh, you said, you want to travel and also people think that they're helping people. They're not. So it's, if you want to travel and you want to be, which is selfish and that's not bad, I travel. Like I said, I want to be specific about leisure tourism when I use these words. And I don't do it much. That's a whole nother thing. But do not think that you're helping anyone. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to people. Don't do that bullshit. If you care about people, stay home. Use your money for people who are from the places that you're going to, who live around you, who you are displacing. Like I said, this is a very minority class of moneyed white people and some BIPOC who are, we're saying more and more traveling. And it is more complex. Like we're talking very general, right? And maybe we'll go into more specific things,
definitely.
but right. So I'm saying, you don't have to lie. You don't have to use that. That is what the ministries of tourism and these nation states want you to think. And you're not doing anything. As far as visas and all of that goes, there are people in every single country in the world, no matter what is going on there and what the laws are, that can go anywhere they want because they're rich. There's rich people in every single country. There's rich people of color who are corrupt and disgusting politicians who can send their kids to the nicest places and who will always have that leisure to do that, that access to do that. And sorry, my cat. And so, that plays a big part. And anyone can buy their way into this. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to be treated the same or anything like that, but you can buy your way into kind of anything that is capitalistic and being, again, someone who wants to be served, which, again, we can talk about that, but it always leaves, it's always at someone else's expense. Almost always, you see this even a lot of the times in my workshops or anything, and even between us, we're always talking about people in the global south as recipients of this kind of tourist occupation when tourism is happening all over the place. And you have these colonizer countries where there are, mass anti-tourist movements in Barcelona and Mallorca and Amsterdam and all these places and all over
In
New York
Hawaii,
City.
at this moment, I like to point out like the huge issue that is happening right now in Hawaii. Like a lot of the people inside Hawaii, they're asking people, please don't come. Don't come at this moment. We don't need any more tourism because the things in the island are not that great. And, like the issue is that, especially in places where, the square foot is such a luxury. And actually I'm living in Florida and I've seen it. Like the prices of everything have double and triple at this moment because it's becoming such a luxury to come and stay and live in a place where a lot of people vacation. And it's a huge issue because, bottom line, where are the people that are there or, already are there, to go when they cannot afford to live in those spaces. Like I've been hearing, like, for example, in Hawaii, food is really expensive. And also living, the cost of living is really expensive. So there are huge calls at this moment to, like, please avoid going to those places. And this is nothing new.
No, Haunani K. Trask, rest in power. She was telling us 30 years ago, don't come here. And look, there's always going to be people. There's Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiians who are on the Ministry of Tourism Board. They work, maybe some of them have hotels. like I said, it's a little complex. You're never going to have, almost never, and this is where we're seeing it happen, like never before, as you point out, where everyone's going to agree, don't come here. But a lot of people are saying that right now, just don't come. So this is what happens when you have travelers forced to stay somewhere for a little bit, which, as we know, these people, these leisure travelers, were going everywhere during the pandemic, before and after. So, and shamelessly so, some of them with a little bit of shame, I guess. And that's always going to happen.
No,
Not
I
even,
think a lot of them without any shame. I was really disgusted to see a lot of like the world travelers or world schooler community, which I visit in the internet, and a lot of them were like totally shamelessly saying like, oh no, we're just gonna keep taking our family everywhere, not using masks, because we have the privilege of keep jumping from one country to the other one without having any limits. And actually, I've seen a lot of people that have moved from Canada to Florida at this moment, because their argument is exactly that here in Florida they're not asking for masks, and they love to live a life without masks. Oh my God, we lost Banny. I guess when they are able to join us, I hope they rejoin, but I hope yeah. So meanwhile, I will also like to point out that I'm from Colombia, and one thing that I notice a lot, especially coming from a country where usually receives a lot of tourism from Europe and the United States, like the amount of times where a lot of the tourists were found and encountered doing things that were really seriously very problematic, and many times without any limitations most of the time. And the issue, like Bani said, is because they have money, and most people will assume like they have money, they can go and do whatever they want around the world without any consequence, because they come from a rich place. Oh, I don't know what happened with Bunny. I have not seen them. Let me send them an invitation again. Let's see. Again. Yes, Haley Jessica Smith. So many Canadians in Mexico saying the same thing. Yeah, like I have encountered many families coming from Canada moving to South Florida, because their argument is that we can be free here and we can live without any masks, and we don't have to do what the government is saying in our home countries. And on that note, I wanted to point out another huge issue that I posted in one of my last posts, that I think it affects directly what we do as an organization, which is children and families, and that will be the industry of sex tourism. Sex tourism creates billions around the year and is worldwide. And bottom line, that happens a lot everywhere. The issues I have with that is like, in many vulnerable places, many children and families, women, are being abused and trafficked thanks to these tourists, thanks to the people that believe that can go anywhere in the world because they have the money and they have the right passport, and take advantage of them. And one more time, I'm just gonna put the example of Colombia. Like like that has been denounced several times the last decades, and still there's nothing that really calls out the attention to the government to really like say, oh, we have a huge issue with this. Like I remember, there's so many stories of women that had been trafficked as sex slaves around the world, and it starts with many of these tourists that go to these places and take advantage of the vulnerable stages of these places. And so my question will be, like, what is the use of, like having tourism and the money of tourism when their own governments are not willing to invest in their own communities, but they want to keep investing in the resource and they want to keep investing in the hotels. And those resorts and those hotels do not generate in reality any change for that community. And kind of like what it says, Banny, with the gentrification, which gentrification means that a bunch of rich persons, or people who have more privilege, will move into a community and take the space and take the resources of the people who are already living in those communities, that are usually people that do not have the same means, but that doesn't mean that they're not worth. They don't have a humanity, that they have a culture that should be protected. So there's so many issues, and I find it so irresponsible for a lot of people that promote in the internet a lot of like tourism and traveling around the world, and family traveling around the world, that never ever talk about these issues. And that is kind of like very troublesome, because I believe, like, if we are going to promote anything about traveling, we should promote as well the responsibilities of traveling. And one of those responsibilities is holding our governments and the people from our countries accountable for their own behaviors, especially around the world. Because I don't see any of these travel influencers saying anything about these. And that is very problematic. I know, like, everything is about the money, everything is about the profiting. And that is an issue, because it's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing an entire population in so many of these countries that have history of abuse. And in return, many of these people in those places, and I may say like Central America, Mexico, South America, are displaced by what's happening, in their countries, because nothing works. And then when they're trying to migrate, or they're trying to displace, go and to another place, they are not welcome, because according to the governments, they say, well, they have to apply for a visa, or they have to do the documentations. But what a lot of people don't understand is that is not accessible to the majority who is displaced. Many of these people are also displaced by the violence in their midst. Such an important conversation to have, and hopefully another time we will have the conversation and finish this conversation with Bani. I want to invite everybody to check what Bani Amor is doing in the internet, via also as well as a writer. I think, and I find so useful what they are doing in as a travel and decolonizer person of color, denouncing a lot of the practices that are happening inside the traveling world at this moment. I think it's so important for us to start asking ourselves, in which ways are we supporting in reality the change in these places that we say we love. We visit, we may visit, and we may love, and like, we should care a lot about what's happening in these spaces. So I would like to name a few of the problematic issues that are happening around, specifically right now in Latin America. The industry of tourism, or profiting from places are sacred, they're natural, of natural importance. And I've seen that a lot, especially coming from people that say they care for the earth. Here's the thing, if we do say we care for the earth, as I do, I think we also need to take into consideration that the earth is part of the many religions and cosmologies of around the world, and that's something that should be protected and should be honored and should be respected. We cannot pretend that that's not a real thing. Like, for example, like I would say, like the pyramids in many of these places around the continent. People may think, well, these places are abandoned places. These places are not places where people live, or, but I have to say, there are a lot of descendants of the people, the indigenous people, that used to worship and have an entire system of beliefs around, these spaces. And sadly, a lot of the tourism is taking advantage of that. So I have to say, like, in which ways we can condone the displacement of these peoples and the destruction of these sacred spaces for the sake of tourism, or for the sake of us, traveling there, when in reality the people in those spaces, their quality of life is not that great. And of course, like I'm not just gonna say, well, like then nobody travels anywhere, because I know people will keep doing it. I'm just, pointing it out, like perhaps the next time that you had the chance to go to a place, you may have the opportunity of really understand what is happening in the place, in that space. It is not just going to be just a vacation, but it could be also a moment for you to really understand what's happening in that region from another perspective. And that should be also propel us to become advocates in our spaces, in the places that we are living at, for them. I think, like in many instances, we can be so like of a reason when we are, hearing like certain practices that can be very damaging for a place or for a group of people. So we can be conscious about it. We can also start teaching our children about, like how important is to care for these communities, is to care for people that are, in other places that we visit, that we go to, and take it to another level, like not just, expect like, oh, well, we're gonna learn the language and just gonna learn how they eat and their music. Like, all those things are wonderful. Those are part of the cultural exchange and knowledge, but also learn about their real history and the reasons why these people do not have the same standard of living that you may have in another part of the world. And many instances people would think, well, but like it's because they don't work, or they don't work as hard as me. And I can assure you, a lot of people around the world work harder than a lot of us and still don't have access to the things that we have access to. So I just wanted to point out, I want to also point out about the violation of the human rights that are very, very tangible, that are so critical at this moment. And in another industry that I see as a white saviorism or saviorism around the world, which is the exploitation of children. And that's something that, like has a huge impact for a lot of people around the world, especially for people and children that have been separated from their parents because they don't have the resources to live in a place where there's pretty much nothing going on besides the industry of tourism. So this has been denounced around the world, not only in this continent and in many other continents around the world. And the question, like Bani said, like, where did it start? How are we going to perpetuate these type of behaviors that are really not helping these communities? Like, if you want to do something for those communities, you really need to empower those communities, period. You cannot expect, being a person who's haven't been there at all or really understands the intricacies of the issues that are in those spaces, to go there and fix it. And one of the main examples I may say at this moment is like what's happening with Iraq, and like how the United States invested so much money into kind of according to them, they were going to help these places. And when in reality, at this moment, they're like seriously calling everybody out. And the people in those spaces are going to be there in many instances asking themselves like what happened, because the help was not really help. And that is a huge question to ask before we visit anywhere. So I just wanted to end this conversation at that note. I wanted to also ask if any of you may have any questions about traveling. I know, like, for example, Bani, because they are a travel writer, or they are asked all the time, like, how can we travel ethically? And their answer is usually there is no way to travel ethically. Because until we do not have an industry that profits from the taking advantage of others in other places just because they're poor or just because they don't have the same means, how can traveling can really be ethic? And the big example is, like, for example, I live in South Florida. There's a huge industry of tourism, but people have like a good paying salary. They have benefits, and still we see a lot of people taking advantage of others, in these industries. For one, example is, like, for example, what happens in hotels and the persons that clean the rooms. There was a huge issue a few years ago with a lot of the hotel cleaning personnel who was being sexually harassed inside the hotel, and they never felt that they were able to say anything. They had to organize and do something about it. But still, and this is happening in the United States. In my mind, I always think like, oh my gosh, imagine what's happening in other places. Like, like they don't have any overseeing about like what's going on in these hotels. And sadly, because of the economic situations of many of these spaces, the less privileged persons are the ones that are getting the whole bulk of issues. So you may travel there and, you may not be the people, who will be taking advantage of that. But there are a lot of other people that are going there specifically to take advantage of that. And, in their own words, we like it here because we don't have any limitations. So I'm just saying, like, that is a huge privilege. And how come some people can do it and some others don't? Like, so many people are, like, so willing to move across the world to an exotic location, not thinking it twice. You know why? Because they have the privilege to do so. And they have the money. And if something goes wrong, in many of the cases, they can come back. They can, turn back to their privileged lives. But many people around the world don't have that option. If they move across the world to another space, they will have to, deal with a lot of other situations, and most likely they may not be able to go back to their lands ever again. So that's something to really understand. I think is really unfair to think that the majority of the people have access to travel channel, which is Mama Tortuga bilingual channel. I have many other conversations there, and I hope you can take advantage of all the things that we do here, but also support us. I think all the topics that we have, I'm always thinking about the families. I'm always thinking about the families that are raising children that are conscious, that are raising children that we are teaching them values about human rights, about taking care of our communities. And I hope these conversations are being taught in our homes. If ever, our children are growing up and they're having the opportunity and the privilege of traveling, let's have these conversations with them. How come they can travel and other people don't? How come, in which ways we can travel and behave responsibly at those spaces? How are we going to treat people at those spaces, even if they don't speak the same language that we speak? In which ways are we going to advocate for people in those spaces, using the privilege of, having the words and having the language and having the money? In which ways are we going to support those communities? So I wanted to go deeper, but I cannot do it by myself. I wanted to do it. Hey, thank you so much for coming back. I was like, oh no, I can't believe it.
I'm sorry, that was the worst timing. I was under the table trying to fix the Wi-Fi for so long, and then I had to call my service provider and buy new data and fix some problems, and then it took 15 minutes to kick in. So I'm very sorry, but you're going to have this saved for people
layer too. That I'd like to point out also, as well as a privilege. A lot of people just assume the majority of the world has access to Wi-Fi and internet and all these things. And no, my love.
Yeah. Even when people talk about if I ever have issues, or I'll go into places and ask for the Wi-Fi password, and everyone is just like, what? You use Wi-Fi? We have unlimited data. Everyone has unlimited data. I'm like, but I'm on the EBB program, so it's free. Anyway, but it was a mess. So I'm sorry. And like I said, this is going to be saved so people can see it later. And
yes. So, and I feel like we need to tackle so many things, but I want to point out to everyone that you do teach in depth about these topics, and also write for certain publications. So if anybody who will be watching this in the future and wants to know more about this huge, industry and the issues and all the layers, they can reach out to Bani, because actually you are offering a class really soon, isn't it? As a workshop?
Yeah, I teach writing workshops, and so the one next week, it's the second post in my IG. Not in, I think 2 weeks in now. Anyway, look, August 8th, 4 hours. That's with the Hudson Valley Writer Center. We have 6 spots left. And yeah, that's a dismantling coloniality and travel writing workshops, which for writers of all levels who want to talk about place, migration, travel in their work, and dismantle the coloniality within that genre and in their work. So yeah, we'll be doing that. Again, that's just one day for 4 hours. And then I'm going to do a lecture series with Atlas Obscura, where it's not just writing. We're going to be talking about travel media, the history of coloniality and travel culture and tourism, and the narrative that, travel writing lays out for that in order to enable it to continue. And yeah, I can go on about that, but that'll be starting in September through October with Atlas Obscura, and I'll post that soon. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. So before we start, we keep talking about, the travel industry. That was another barrier for people embodies to be able to travel. And one of those, and I want to, mention that I'm still learning more about the disabled persons around the world and how that also affects their capacity to being able to, move their bodies around the world, and how a lot of body able persons like me are not, even taking that in consideration many times, when we are promoting like travel here, travel there. Like I remember, like for example, there are, I live close to the beach, and I have a friend who has a child in a wheelchair. And, I was like mindlessly like, oh, let's go to this beach. And this person is like, no, we cannot go to this beach. And I was like, but how come? And they're like, because we need a ramp that goes from, the parking lot to the beach in order for me to, pull his wheelchair. And in my mind, it's like, wow, like, are you telling me like not every beach in Florida has something like it for people that are in a wheelchair, for children that are in a wheelchair? And she was telling me no, like we need to go to certain beach that do offer the ramp, and like little things like that I will say that also is a barrier for people, and that's, in the capacity, of many body situations that can arise. Like I'm also talking about like people that are big bodies that like also have issues taking a plane, or taking certain rides, because they do not have accommodations to travel places, period.
Yeah, yeah. And then I'll add trans people to that. So those are three different things we can break down. So yeah, actually Florida is one of the few places that has a few beaches, and I think, I don't know if it's Fort Lauderdale, but that have, I'm here, that have, they're not ramps, they're mats, and you can buy them. They're very expensive, but they're huge, huge mats that can go on the sand to the water. And those places also have the floaties for people in chairs to float in the water. So yeah, that doesn't really work. And I walk with a limp, I use a cane, and sand is not my friend, nor is the ocean much of my friend. So, this is something that some of us have in common with fat people or plus people, is constantly being told to exercise, to do what you need to do. It's like, oh, you can swim, right? And it's like, I can drown. Like, excuse me. I'm sick. I'm just getting over being sick. So yeah, that's just that one thing about going to the beach. And yeah, anything. I mean, for a lot of people in disabled community and chronically ill community, this whole over a year now have been very vocal and resentful of everyone, especially privileged people, right? Just being like, oh my God, I can't go to Bora Bora, I can't go to Curacao, I can't do this and that, like I can't even go to the bar, like, or a party, and I miss this and I miss that, and I just don't have any sympathy at all. I have empathy to a fault, but I don't have sympathy at all for anyone. And a lot of us, disabled people in our private groups, excuse me, we're just like, oh my God, just talking shit about, so much of the culture who wants to do fun, expensive things. Let's be real. In a larger context, I like to go to bars, but it's also rare that I can go anywhere. So it's like I'm homebound and socially isolated all the time for years. And I developed disabilities as an adult. So I don't go to Manhattan. I live in Queens. Like I don't go to other neighborhoods. Like I can barely walk around here. Usually I need help just for someone to get something across the street for me, or take my recycling down, or things like that, or just obviously doing things in my room that I just can't do myself, and that's expensive. But anyway, just movement in general is very hard for a lot of us. So we can't even access, this is New York City, this is one of the most advanced, most toured cities in the world. And there's only a very, very, very few amount of stations that have working elevators. And a lot of times they're broken. So it's very limited where I can go. I mean, I would have to walk pretty far to go to the nearest one that has an elevator. And then sometimes you'll get there, you'll take a bus, you'll take two, then you'll walk. You know, you have to prepare like hours in advance to go somewhere to meet somebody, which I just rarely do. So, and then it'll be broken. And then you'll get on a train or you get on a bus and people will refuse to get up for you. And that is just a common reality. So I spend a lot of money fucking up my credit just taking rides because I have a sitting disability and I have a walking disability. So I usually have to lie down in cars, and it's all these things, right? So, you know, just to be complaining about all that and not even have any self-awareness when like we can't get around our own houses. You have immunocompromised people who have not left their homes in over a year. And like, you're like, fuck it, I want to do this and that for myself. And it's like, excuse
And
me.
nowhere, and yeah, and a lot of people don't even want to wear a mask. Like, like we're getting to this point, like, oh, it's an infringement in my freedom. I'm like, yeah, like, how come, you know, like other people? But, you know, before, you know, I wanted to talk about this because I'm having this conversation, and the majority of my audience have families, like we are raising children. And I think it's so crucial that we have these conversations at our home. That, you know, we talk to our children about, like, yes, sweetheart, this is called privilege. This, like the fact that you are able to, you know, like, even if you complain, but you can hike and you have access to, like, a mountain trail, that is a privilege. And I don't think, you know, like, we are not talking about privileges to shame people, but on the contrary, it's to kind of like really realize that we need to become more conscious about the decisions that we are making, the things that are coming out of our mouth, and the things that we are doing. Because a lot of people, you know, I see a lot of people saying, oh, but I do care for others. But it's not just by saying, you know, we need to show the care. And in many instances, like having this conversation, like I'm pretty sure, like, I remember the first time, like, somebody fat told me, like, no, I cannot go to your house if you don't have a chair that will be able, you know, it's comfortable enough for me, to, you know, and I'm not going to break, and, you know, like, all these different levels. I never really seriously, because that's something that I never experienced on myself. And that's where you start seeing these things. That's where you start having some conscious decisions about, like, in which ways my home can be a place that is accessible, in which ways when I'm organizing events or even a vacation, a family vacation, is there someone in my family who are not able to come because, you know, the place where we are going to go, like what you say, is like at the beach, and this person cannot enter the beach without, you know, special access. All those little things that people think, oh, it's such an annoyance. But I do believe that just by caring a little, it's really showing care. And I imagine, like, you know, if we start teaching our children to become this mindful about the situation of other people, like how amazing can it be in the future where we will have people planning cities, entire places where they're going to have that conscious, say, no, I cannot build that there because it's going to be obstructive, or I cannot do this because it won't be, you know, able or accessible to these persons. And that's why we need more different people in these positions of, you know, trying to also create spaces and also ways for they to travel, because, you know, there's so many levels. Like in my mind, I'm always like, what if you compound different conditions? Like I will always say, well, what if you're a disabled person, or, you know, have a condition in your body, and also you are poor, or, you know, your socioeconomic status doesn't allow you, and you are not American or European, and you don't speak English, and you don't, you know, like all these different levels that actually exist, and the majority of the world live at. And having entire accounts to kind of like preach and say, oh, I just came from, you know, like this exotic tropical paradise, and thinking like, normalizing it, like everybody's able to do it, like for example, the thing that just happened with Jeff Bezos, like that is the main example of what happens with that kind of mentality of like thinking like, oh yes, like whoever is able to afford going into this space will be able to go with me. Like seriously, what's the percentage of all the population of the world who will be even having access to something like it? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah,
And to
exactly.
the expense of whom? Because that's the other part that makes me very upset. To the expense of whom? Like who's really breaking their backs for this person to be able to have like their vacation of the world, of the lifetime? Like seriously, like I if you haven't seen what's going on around the world and in reality
So
who's
dark.
bearing the huge bulk of all the industry of tourism, at this moment you haven't been paying attention. You don't really pay attention of what's really happening around the world. Tourism has not helped those spaces, okay? Has not helped those places. On the contrary, has brought many other issues to those spaces. And that's something that we need to realize before going to those places, before even promoting going to those places. So I love for you to talk about the situation with Central America right now, because I know you're really knowledgeable about that, and I want to touch that bottom because part of my family is in Central America. And what is going on over there is crazy. It's been like, but now it's like supposedly being promoted to tourism and Bitcoin. So I would love for you to talk about that.
I wouldn't say I'm super knowledgeable on Central America. Not really, despite being half Guatemalan. I'm not, I just listen to others. If you want to talk about El Salvador, I mean, we'll just talk about, Sad Girl Danny. You can go to her page and the third post in my IG, and it's just that Kiona Karen shit with that how not to travel like a basic bitch person, who has that account where she is an influencer, but a decolonized one. And I just bring that up because that's what was being brought up. So many things, right? You're promoting like social justice tours to do surfing and learn about Bitcoin when you have a government that is saying that is doing this, and you have local people or indigenous people. Not every local people is native, right, or black, and they have different interests. They can have ties to the fascist government, like some of them who are defending her. And you're going to see the pattern is that each government, each nation state has a stake in people coming over and touring. So there's usually something going on that they're trying to repress. I mean, I don't think the Ministry of Tourism in Hawaii and the government there wants you to hear that Kanaka is saying to not come. I don't think that, the Ministry of Tourism in El Salvador wants you to know that there is a movement against Bitcoin there. So, these don't happen in vacuums. You have to look at what am I supporting when I'm going somewhere, because literally sometimes, like, I remember when Myanmar, excuse me,
Don't worry, don't worry.
when Myanmar was open again, the whole conversation and like those white travel people were just like, is it right to go? Because when you go, there's the military junta that all the money was going to, and they had walled off, there was a little tourist zone that literally you cannot go out of. So they set up a little place that people can tour and be like, this is great, come here. And that money is going to this military that is oppressing and killing the native people of Myanmar. So that happens all the time. You can go to booking.com, Airbnb. Amnesty International had this campaign against those companies for allowing, to sell to, you can book a place in occupied Palestine. And I'm not just talking about in Jerusalem, but outside where Bedouin communities were being pushed out at that same moment, like you can see them in their glamping, ground. It was like glamping stuff. And these people have been pushed out just for you to be there. So wherever you go, there is an agenda to suppress local movements against, oppression. And what leisure travel does, and travel writing as well, and travel media, is support that. So yeah, sun, fun, culture, relaxation, vacation, and all this stuff covers, it's very pretty, right? It covers this really ugly reality that we can't act like we're not complicit in. I mean, I'm also a settler migrant here, so where I am, so it's not like I'm not complicit in anything. So when people talk about ethical tourism, it's just very much like a straw, not a straw man, but it's a slippery slope, right? In ethics in general, when are we all making the best decision? I mean, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So if we can just admit that, that's only one step. I think privilege is a word that I use less and less because I rather look at power. So it's great that, we are learning and teaching, younger ones or whatever the case may be to be more socially aware. But, you shouldn't have to wait until someone, comes to you and is like, wait, I can't, fit in your chair. I can't go to this beach. If we taught them that the way that these systems work are not meant to benefit and like everyone, and without capitalism, obviously rich people, but it doesn't like, universal access to make the infrastructure of the city or a town accessible to all is very possible, but people, it's a burden to have to think about that. There's an idea that colonization happened and that everything is a means to an end. Oh, we can't end this, so, I might as well travel here. And like I said, we're not here to like shame a bunch of people because we're also kind of a part of these things, whether it's local or abroad. I mean, obviously, economically, my footprint is just going to be so much smaller for the harm that I could cause because I can't go that many other places, even when I was able-bodied. Like, no, as you were saying with the state parks, and I know I'm going around, I'm moving around, but I mean, I was born and raised in New York City. Like, we never went anywhere. Like, you have to get a car to drive to a state park or a national park, and then you're paying mad money. I mean, the Bronx Botanical Garden is like 250 acres of beauty, and it's like $25 to go in, and it's 2 hours away on the MTA from where I am. So it's like, there's so many barriers, but at the end of the day, it's like, should we all, do I want more diverse tourists and more diverse travelers? I'm not very interested in telling people, where to go or to go at all. I mean, especially as we're saying, if we're talking about a global minority, of rich white people and some of the rest of us, then I think consistently, whether it's white supremacy and all this violence that we see all the time, asking them to kind of think about people who are more oppressed and thinking that that's going to lead to any great change, I just don't think that's ever going to happen. It's been hundreds of years. Those people are not going to change their minds. I mean, obviously, people like us, and I don't mean to like distance myself from whiteness, but we do care, and we're trying to reach people who do care. But even then, people listening or followers or readers and people in my workshops still are gonna go. And if even those people are not gonna, not go to Hawaii or not go to places where people are telling you don't come, then we're fucked. So, I mean, we have to look at the systems of white supremacy and capitalism and imperialism and cis heteropatriarchy and ableism, because these things are at play all the time, right? That's intersectionality. These are at play all the time, and we're living under these conditions no matter where we are and who we are. So I think starting at that foundation will inform the way that we move about the world wherever we go, right?
Yeah, and actually, thank you so much for pointing that out because I think, like many times we lie to ourselves thinking that if we do this and we do that and we give money here and we give money there, we are not part of the problem. And when in reality, and that is so true, I'm also a settler. By the mere fact that I'm living in a space where my ancestors didn't live, I'm taking a space that, like it's not, the space that, I should be, but in so facto. But the issue is that we need to understand, and that's why, I'm super interested in talking about, migration as human right, because I definitely believe that the fact that many people that have the privilege and the access to travel and to move, you know, freely across the continents, and and they call themselves expats. I remember the first time I hear it, I was like, oh really? Like, so if you move to another place and you are, like rich, then you are expat. Like, I was really seriously, I wanted to learn because I wanted to know, like, if I'm expat too. And then
Yeah.
I realized, like, no, they just call themselves expats because they don't want to be associated with the immigrants. And all these kind of mentalities that is a play and game that has been playing at so many levels around the centuries. So it's good that we talk about why these things are happening, because it has been designed to be like that. Okay, so this is not a coincidence. It's not why are we talking about traveling and tourism, but we are pointing out that there's huge problems, and especially with human rights violations and the destruction of natural habitats, thanks to this tourism industry, which provides billions of dollars to only a few corporations, only a few people that have access to, profit from that. And so the other issue that I finding out, like, lately a lot, especially from people that say, oh, but we love the earth, and we are connected to the earth, and then they are starting to kind of like promote a lot of ecological tourism, like they want to do ayahuasca, or like they want to do these retreats. And I have to say, a lot of them, they may have really amazing intentions, but I'm taking a class about peace resolutions, and the teacher said, like, one time, it's like, but intentions do not help. Like, you may have the best intention in the world, but if you go into a space of conflict or war and you don't even understand what's going on there, your intentions will even make it worse.
Yeah. What is it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's like, that's nice. Intention is important in our lives, but what does it have to do with impact? And that's something I talk about often. If I ever say the words you should not be saying, maybe don't travel, especially to these very powerful people. It's like, well, but I travel to be more culturally aware. I think the point of travel is to connect with people and to learn this and learn that. And it's like, that's nice that that's your intention, but the impact does not reflect that. So, you going somewhere and learning something, again, that's selfish. You can learn shit at home. You can do that without like going somewhere and seeing people in person. That sounds a little objectifying and zoological to me. Like, I want to go to places where native people are and just look at them. And it's like, the gaze is just very odd. Like, why do you have to be up close to different people and think that that's going to make you less racist? I mean, there's an idea that people who travel are more culturally aware. And if that were the case, then why, like, colonizers would be the most ethical, social justice fucking liberators in the world. But that doesn't happen. People are not traveling for that reason, okay? And even if it's a very, very small, less than 1% minority, if I hear this every day, like day in and day out, in travel writing, in the industry that I'm in, or I'm kind of on the outskirts of, or whatever the case may be, that this is the line and this is the idea, this is the motto. But I go to Ecuador and no, these people are acting a mess. They're acting like a fucking mess. All of them, okay? Maybe I'll meet like a few people and I'll just be like, I personally don't want any white person to come to Ecuador, and of any race. I mean, especially Anglo people and gringos. But I have to feed my cat, she's sick. But that's my opinion. But even if you tell people don't travel, what is that going to do? People are going to do it anyway. Someone was just saying that on Twitter in response to one of my tweets. So, I mean, that's how it is. The majority, I don't think, are going to change because the industry is not set up for that. So if we keep looking at individual choices and individual people to see if they might, do better or whatever, I mean, the system is still going to be the same. There's still going to be more people born every day who are going to take advantage of all those things. And that's what power and privilege is, right? Is you have benefits that you were born with or you're imbued with, whether that's, being cis or being male, cis male, and you already know you have the ability to oppress so much and you're doing it all the time. But and there's a stake in not wanting to end cis heteropatriarchy because it benefits you. I mean, there's a stake in not wanting to dismantle anti-blackness because it benefits everyone who is not black in some sort of way. So it's like, am I going to take advantage of that, in this case travel, and think that that makes me a better person, or just hold off? I think that's the whole thing about having power and privilege, is maybe not using it or maybe not using it just for your benefit and thinking that's helping anything. Like those book clubs that were popping up for non-black people to learn about black stuff last year, and a lot of people were saying, what is this going to do? What is buying the Robin DiAngelo book going to do besides, it's good to be educated about some things, but does that always lead to an impact? So we can learn and we can learn.
That's a great, excellent point, because seriously, I hear a lot, especially in family circles, where they say, but education is so important. And I navigate through like a lot of very progressive circles where, they say, but we need to educate. But I will always say, well, yeah, but education by itself will not bring any change, because seriously, if you think about it, the most evil cultures in the world, in world history, have been very educated. But, like if you really go in deep,
yeah.
they were very educated, but they knew what they wanted to, which was evil, and it's like that point. It's like, and I mean, it's hard for me to listen. I'm not even gonna lie to you, like to listen what you're saying, but I'm listening to it because I believe that, like offering, especially next generation, like knowledge, especially about other cultures, really can make a difference. But that by itself will not make the difference. Okay.
Right.
So because if it was true, we should have seen it. Like how many generations had access to college and university educations, PhDs, and they still go to other territories and take advantage of the people over there. And I was having in the mini, while you were trying to connect, talking about the huge issue that I see, the exploitation and trafficking of humans around the world, which is a massive, massive, massive business that has a lot to do with tourism. And their main, objects are pretty much children and women that are in vulnerable places, in vulnerable situations. And you may ask, like, who are doing these things? I can assure you, whoever is doing that stuff and exploiting those vulnerabilities are very educated persons, are people that have access and money to education. And they don't do those things in their home origins, like in their countries of origins. Why? Why do you think they don't do those things in their countries of origin? But they do go to other continents and do the stuff that they do. And in many cases, they even profit from doing those things. Like there is one account that I love and I appreciate and I support, which is Non-White Saviors. I thank them for exposing, especially, the white saviorism that is portrayed, especially from organizations of faith in Africa. They focus mainly on Africa, but I always say, like, oh my gosh, like the same thing is happening, like has happened here in this continent and in Asia. Like, like they have this entire business of like they say, oh, but we go there to help. But how many centuries have been helping? They, or according to them, they have been helping, and the situation in those countries are like pretty much the same or worse.
Yeah, yeah. They just, white saviors. They put a post about Peace Corps recently, where they were like, you know, everyone, Peace Corps pulled all of their people from so many parts of the world, and for it's like only when I talk when it hurts.
Oh, you don't happen
I'm
to
sorry.
have one of those like cough drops? Like
I
sometimes
don't.
that helps.
I don't, and I'm out of honey. Pero seguimos. And they were like, everyone pulled these Peace Corps people, and those communities survived. So, who says that they need them? I mean, what they need is imperialism to end, not send their imperial volunteers who are being paid, they're not volunteers, to represent the West. I mean, Peace Corps is inherently fucked up. Look into the way that it was founded. What was that, John F. Kennedy? Look into the way that it was founded. It was to destabilize communism movements in the global South, so that they wouldn't fight back against places like the U.S. So this is just one way to look at white saviorism and the white savior complex, or the Western savior complex, as that whole white man's burden, that whole missionary concept of like these poor black and brown people who cannot save themselves. They're just so inhuman and fucking. I don't
Well,
like to use. Mhm.
I saw a documentary talking about that exactly affecting even in the education of many other places in the world, like how this type of mentality has affected so many cultures and communities around the world, like telling them that the way they educate their young ones is not education, that is not good enough. Like their language is not good enough. Like they need to speak English. And then they bring these institutions, and they kind of like brainwash them to think like, well, but that's the only way, like that's the only education that is valid. And then they were showing, that the huge disconnection of generations with their parents, because they will take away their children. They have to pay for their kids to go to these Catholic schools or Christian schools, or like, and these kids will never learn their parents' language. They will because they were forbidden to speak their parents' language. Of course, they were supposed to speak only in English, and proper English, by the way. When they were promised, like, oh, you're gonna have an education, you're gonna have like a career and everything, and no, like these institutions were funded to profit from those communities, okay? Because
Yeah.
they did not really change anything in those communities. So what happened is like a lot of these generations, they will finish their school. Their parents will like work really, really hard to send them to those schools. And at the end, there wasn't really any jobs for these children to be part of, like they will have to go back to their villages where they will be total strangers to their own families, and there wasn't any other work, so they will live highly horrible lives. Many of them will even kill themselves because they will feel like they will be like failures, and how these elders in these communities will then reflect and say, how come we didn't, so that we were teaching our children to be the future leaders of our own communities, okay? And to learn the skills that were needed for our community, not to serve others, okay? And I was like, oh, like this has happened, and it has been replicated around the world. It's one of the gifts of colonialism, and it has happened around the world. I cannot, till this day, like how many people have tell so many people like, no, you're not valuable because you don't know enough English, or you're not valuable because you didn't have your PhD, when in reality you have so many skills that they need. Okay, because talking about like the skills of like growing food, like
Exactly.
like haven't we just went through like who are the essential workers? Who are the essential workers?
Yeah.
The people that knows how to grow the food. Okay, and like how for how many generations we have told children like, no, you have to become a PhD, or you have to go and be a lawyer, or you have to, and it's so much that we need to change in our minds, and don't pass those scenes to next generations. That's why we need to do our own job as parents, our guidance, as mentors, because we need to realize that all these things are connected. We are connected. What's happening to the earth is connected with the communities. Um, I like to point out as well, like what's happening, especially with the displacement of indigenous people, because many progressive people wants to go and live in those natural areas. I'm talking here, for example, like I have some friends that live near Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, and this lake is sacred. Like they had care for this lake for generations because it's sacred for these people who, by the way, they're still there. It's not like they had died and like it was like, oh, they're not here. Like there's a huge population of Maya beliefs. Okay, they still practice their religion and do everything, and they are also being displaced by people that want to live in these spaces. Of course, they're beautiful spaces. Why do you think they're beautiful spaces? Because these people have taken care of them for generations, and now a lot of people are buying land, and also because of development, they're thinking about like making electricity in many of these areas using the water, and how that is affecting a lot of. But then that's only one of the examples of many other examples that we can give around the world about the problematic behaviors of people that may have great intentions in trying to kind of like, oh, but I'm just gonna go and support them. Supporting how? Like by buying un chal, a hat. Like
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that from here, by the way, and you can even go beyond. Like you can start supporting the organizations that are taking care of those spaces in real time. So, like that's kind of like some ways that we need to start thinking and moving. Okay, not just speaking about. Oh my gosh, I think Bunny also froze one more time. Let's hope it's not leaving us again. But yeah, those are kind of like very concrete examples. Oh, Bunny left us again. But anyways, I think we had a wonderful conversation. I hope everybody who was in attendance can kind of like relate a little bit of with what we were trying to convey, which is like we need to start becoming a little bit more have a little bit more understanding about what's happening in other places. Like like let's try to put ourselves in their position, and understand that it's not that we are trying to be mean and like petty of like don't go there because we don't want you to go. It's the issue is that sadly, yes, that is one of the ways gentrification is justified. Yeah, so we need to become seriously more aware that our actions indeed affect others, and when we travel we are affecting other communities. So if you want to make like an impact, like try to find ways to make impact in your own community. I will like that's one of the arguments that they say when like please don't send more missionaries or people or volunteers unless it's completely necessary. I will talk like, for example, surgeons people that really are, like capable of, taking emergencies over there. But even that, like, I'm pretty sure they have so many capable people in those spaces, in those places, in so many territories that can do that job, and they can have more knowledge about what the real situation of what's happening in those areas. So that cannot be one justification why we will keep using that as a, an argument of, like going and taking the space and taking the territories on those areas. So more of you can follow Bani and more. Also, I will invite you to read the articles that they have written. I think I have learned so much from them, and we need to support more of these, especially in the traveling industry. We need to hold accountable these people that are earning so much money around the world. And hey, I get it. It's their business. Okay? Like Bani said, most probably will never change that business, but we can start changing our own habits, and it can start with us, and that makes a huge difference. Okay, friends, thank you so much to everybody. I love